So thanks to everyone who's joined us this morning for the latest installment of IMPERO Talks. I'm Coris from IMPERO, and taking you through today's presentation is Michael, who's IMPERO's owner and ECD. So this week we are taking a look at how the new generation of consumers are driving change specifically for luxury brands and others kind of in that peripheral category. As an agency, we know a lot about Gen Z. We've helped a number of clients make themselves relevant and engage these audiences. And I'm sure a lot of people who joined into this call also know a lot about Gen Z as well. So rather than doing purely a deep dive into this audience, we're going to be looking at how they've collectively impacted luxury brands and what luxury brands are now doing to resonate with and engage with them, because it's fair to say that a lot has changed over the last 3, 4, 5 years, but there have been even more changes in the last 6, 12, 18 months. So we're going to be looking at what those changes are looking like and how that whole category is evolving. So before I pass you over to Michael, I just want to say thanks for sharing your challenges and concerns when you registered, when you mentioned the things that are on your priority concern for the next kind of 6 to 9 months. If we've not covered them in this presentation, then really please don't hesitate to add a question in the Q&A tab at the bottom of the Zoom window, as we'll be having time for questions at the end. And if anything you've heard or in today's presentation has resonated with the current challenges that you're faced with, and you'd like to explore any of these themes further, then let me know and we'd be happy to pick up with you afterwards. So with that said, I'm going to pass over to Michael and we can crack straight on into this. Michael.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks everyone for joining. As Coris says, we're going to look at this, what's driving the new sort of face of luxury. Look, I'll talk about a number of sort of brands today, many from the fashion industry who are probably driving the change the quickest. There's a lot to be learned there. We'll look at booze brands, categories like vodka and cognac probably especially. But we're also going to talk about sort of the classic brands from this category, Rolex, Rolls-Royce, and so on. So look, I'll crack straight in, but as Coris says, if there's any questions, just whacking the Q&A and we can try and find time at the end there to circle back on them. So, how do I change this? So, the big question, how are the youth driving a change in luxury, and what all brands can learn from it? And when I say all brands, I mean, I think and I'll dive into this a bit more, if you're a luxury brand or managing a luxury brand, there's probably a lot to discuss and sort of hopefully find a bit of insight here today. But I don't think what we're going to talk about today is exclusively for the luxury brands. We'll learn from luxury brands, but actually what we can learn is how to apply some of this thinking to brands outside the category if you're going after Gen Z. So look, I'll start with just kind of some broad Gen Z insights. And when I say insights, I use that term loosely, to be honest, because this is what we kind of all know, right? This is what we've kind of all read in all the articles for the last few years, and this is a generation that spend all day on their phones. Well, who doesn't? They drink less than boomers, probably a good thing. They have less sex than millennials, and they prefer job security over career development. And it really sort of leads you to believe, if you read these at face value, that this is kind of Gen sensible. Gen very sensible, to be honest. If you ask someone like me, slightly from the Gen X generation, it seems like a complete and utter waste of youth, but we're not here to discuss that. So yeah, but I think when you look at these stats, and actually if you go back and find where they came from and so on, the thing that I'm finding more and more is that these kind of broad demographic insights are all probably 2 to 3 years old now, if not more. And I think that, I don't really think of these as insights in all honesty. I kind of think, maybe they're facts. And, the thing is that when you're young and Gen Z is young, how you operate in the world changes quickly. There's a massive difference between a 20-year-old and a 24-year-old and just how people mature and view the world and so on. So look, if this is generation sensible, then conversely, if we think about the definition of luxury, well, it's kind of anything but sensible. This is the definition from, I think, Webster's dictionary, and it's, basically the definition of luxury is expensive things that are pleasant to have but not not necessary. You don't really need them. Luxury, by definition, is actually unsensible, and this is why I think about those insights and I go, just something doesn't sit right, because in my head something doesn't really add up, because actually every time you go down to Soho and look at who's lining up outside Supreme, the luxury skatewear sort of shop brand, or outside any kind of new shop opening when we could, pre-COVID, it seems to me that the queue's always packed with Gen Z. So sort of what's happening here. So diving in a bit deeper, one study we found said that Gen Z are actually 2 times more likely compared to Gen X and Boomers to buy luxury goods as treats. So that's 2 times more likely just to go out and buy something that just for a treat, because it's unnecessary, because it's completely, unsensible. And so some of these insights kind of aren't adding up. And actually BCG, a Boston Consulting Group and Highsnobiety, did a really great white paper on this. And I'd urge anyone that's in the luxury category to get this downloaded and really understand it. You can get it off Highsnobiety, the magazine, the online magazine. But they said 61% of luxury market will be composed of millennials and Gen Z by 2026, and that's up from 39% right now. And then even more when you dig even deeper, it turns out that almost every traditional luxury brand is turning up in the Gen Z space. Like whether it's Burberry turning up on the gaming platform Twitch, or and these are all gaming examples, but Louis Vuitton it does a big partnership with League of Legends, or Gucci teams up with Fnatic, the gaming crew. And it just kind of says to me, so how come if they're so damn sensible, why are all these brands flocking to try and capture their attention? Why are they all lining up outside Supreme and Louis Vuitton stores and so on to get in? So that's really what we're going to look at today. Why is the sensible generation flocking to the most unsensible of purchases? So we'll look at why young people, why are they driving and diving into these luxury brands? We'll talk about that first. How is it changing the market, the luxury category? Like what's happened to luxury to make this happen? And then, hopefully some tips and tricks at the end on how brands are actually operating to win them over. Like what are they actually doing tactics wise and sort of strategically wise to win them over? So let's start with this first one. Why are young people driving luxury demand? I think the first thing to know is that in every demographic that comes through, whether it's Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, whatever, there is always a couple of dominant tribes that set the cultural agenda. And the cultural agenda is just another word for cool, right? They just define what's cool and what's interesting. And that usually happens when the consumer is around the age of between about 18 to 28. That's just kind of, if you look back in history of music and so on, that's kind of when, all the famous, bands were at their peak, all the rappers were exploding and so on. And so within every demographic, you find these tribes, and they sort of set the agenda for what the rest of us outside the actual tribe sort of think of as cool, and how we shop and how we consume things. And that's a really important point, because these tribes are bigger than their own scale. The dominant tribe influences consumers much more broadly than just their own demographic. So it's not about these luxury brands just finding this new consumer and selling stuff to them. It's actually about engaging this consumer, because they're setting the cultural agenda, and they're defining what's cool and interesting to the rest of us. So 10 years, in the last 10 years, maybe 12 years now, you had one dominant tribe that was the classic millennial hipsters. And if you've heard me talk before, I talk about this quite a bit, because I find it really interesting, and I find it really useful when we're thinking about what's happening next. Now, this hipster generation kind of, you didn't have to be a hipster to sort of partake in the trends that they were setting up. There's a reason why we all sit around drinking Aperol spritzers and Negronis. There's a reason why plaid shirts are back. There's a reason why we now look to book Airbnb over sort of classic, Hilton hotels or whatever. And it's because, in the last 10 or 12 years, this tribe set the cultural agenda. They brought back the idea of craft and of heritage and of experience over things. That's why we all sit around drinking lattes now, when 15 years ago Nescafe Gold was fine. So and just to put some more evidence around that, these hipsters drove change in product design, marketing, and consumption outside their own demographic. And that's what these really influential consumer tribes end up doing. So before millennials, you'd walk into a pub and you'd get the grand, you basically get mass-produced lager on tap, wouldn't you? You get Foster's, Carlsberg, Carling, Stella, whatever. And now we all sit around drinking microbreweries and local beer brands and IPAs and so on. And that's really because the hipsters set the agenda around craft and niche brands. It used to be that you'd walk into a supermarket and all you could choose when it came to juice was orange and apple. That was about it. And now, you can buy things like charcoal and kombucha and drinks like that from places like Pret and Tesco. So again, it's not about just this tribe consuming it. It's that the rest of us, gladly follow along when there's something new and exciting being set by these cultural influences. Same with tea. 10, 15 years ago, PG Tips was about it. And now you can, drink any manner of different teas, from brands like Tea Pigs and so on. And that's not niche. You can get that from Ocado. You can get that from Tesco. It's not just in the little, hipster corner store anymore. Now, 10 years ago, if the hipster was the dominant tribe and all about craft heritage and experiences, today we've got a new tribe coming through, and they're really already here, to be honest. They're not on the verge. They're already influencing things massively. And it's the tribe that if I was a luxury brand marketer, I would be looking directly at these guys. I'd be looking at the street culture generation, because these guys are no longer all about niche brands and craft and heritage. They've almost gone back to almost a bit of a 90s vibe where it's much more about the big logos, the ostentatious fashion, and bling, essentially. And I'll talk about bling a bit later on, because bling's actually been upgraded. We call it bling 2.0 now, and it's got a different spin on it that's really important to understand. But this generation, this tribe here is what's setting the cultural agenda, is what's defining what's interesting and cool to the rest of us, and they're buying big into luxury brands. Now, what is street culture? Well, look, we could sit here and do 2 days worth of seminars on webinars just on that. But broadly speaking, it's kind of the intersection between street sports like skateboarding, or sort of urban sports like surfing and so on, hip hop music, and fashion, and streetwear and luxury fashion. And this is a culture that's buying back into known brands. And that's really important if you're a luxury brand, because it's really hard to be a niche luxury brand and get scale. It's hard for any niche brand to get scale, but they are buying into the big bolshy brands again. And that's really important if you're marketing a luxury brand at the moment. So how influential are they? Well, going back to that BCG and the high snobiety big white paper they did, that said that in 2026 that the luxury market would be made up of young millennials and Gen Z. When they looked deeper into that, they found that 42% of the luxury consumers they surveyed globally actually identify street culture as their dominant style and cultural influence, making that by far the most dominant tribe in the luxury area. So this is where this movement is starting from. And if we understand this consumer and how they operate and why they're gravitating back to these big luxury brands, we've got a chance of understanding what to do with that information and how to capture their attention themselves. So as I say, they are gravitating back to the big brands. So we had this kind of reverse trend in the last 10, 15 years driven by sort of older millennials and hipsters that, as Forbes sort of said it, they gravitated away from established corporate brands. For the first time in many, many years, they moved, they were much more interested in, the niche gin brand around the corner, the little beer brand, the fashion brand that no one had ever heard of. They were much less about the logo and more about the product itself. But this tribe has swung right back the other way, and they actually use brands to express themselves. They use brands to build their pillars of identity, in a world where identities are becoming more and more fluid. And High Snobiety put it really well when they said it's in the middle of this quote, it's brands, not bands, that young people are thirsting after. And I always give the kind of example here of when I was growing up 25 years ago, it was all about the music you listened to or the movies you were into, that defined who you were as a person, as a teenager. But there's a reason why that these kids are actually using brands much more now to to create their identity. And I'll go into that now because I do think it's really important to understand the context around this. So the first thing to know is that, as kind of one of these broad demographic insights, it's not that interesting anymore, but in the context of what we're talking to today, it's important to note that they are truly the world's first 100% digital natives. They've only ever known a world where their phones were really smart. They connect to the internet, as good as free because it's all just paid for monthly, so you don't notice it. It's super fast. And they've got the whole world in their back pocket whenever they want it. Now, at the same time that that's happened, you've had brands like Spotify, or platforms like Spotify, Netflix, and YouTube just explode. And basically what this meant is that the old pillars of identity have become sort of ubiquitous and free. So as I say, back in my day, it was all about the music you listened to that defined, whether you were a grunge kid or a hip hop kid or whatever. But now music's free. And it's instant. If someone drops a new album, the whole world gets it at the same time. And so there's not as much cultural clout with that anymore, because it's not like you can say to your friend, look, I've just spent my hard-earned money buying this CD, and you don't have it and you've never heard of them. It's like if someone says, have you heard the new Kanye West album? You can go, of course I have. The whole world got it at the very same moment on Spotify. Same thing on with movies. Netflix and other platforms have basically meant that instantaneous access globally to these cultural important events like TV and new films and so on, meant the whole world can access them, and they've just lost a little bit of their cultural a pool because they are so ubiquitous and they are so free. And look, this is only going to speed up. So I don't know if you saw this this week or late last week. Warner Bros. Kind of probably, I'd hazard as a guess, one of the most important and largest, and certainly one of the big blockbuster studios in the States, has basically said in 2021 they're going to release all their films simultaneously in cinemas and on the digital platform HBO Max in the States. Now they're saying, well, that's because of COVID and we're not sure what's going to happen next year. But I kind of think this is softening up the cinema industry, which is in a huge amount of trouble because they haven't modernized with the times. And this is softening them up for all other production companies and film companies, basically to say, we're no longer going to wait. We're no longer going to wait till you've got for the cinemas to release it, and then we'll put it out on the platforms. We just want to get our product in front of as many people as possible at the same time, because that's how you're going to create hype. So this is only going to speed up. It's sped up because of COVID, but it's only going to speed up the fact that more and more content is free and all of us can create it and access it now. But the thing that still has value in the world are brands, because you've still got to buy and pay for brands, especially fashion brands, or especially those brands that are conspicuous by their nature, whether it's a blingy bottle of cognac or a car you drive. So brands are because you've still got to literally pay for a brand, they've still got value, and it's unlike content, films, and music. And of course, luxury brands have the most value because they probably always will and have the most clout. So for the first time in a generation, we've got kids gravitating back to big brands, and that they are embracing them to build their own personal brand. They use these brands to identify who they are in the world, purely because of the nature of the fact that it costs you a lot to wear an Off-White logo, as you can see these kids here. Off-White being the brand of Virgil Abloh, who's now also the menswear designer at Louis Vuitton. So luxury has very much gone street, and you'll see that these streetwear brands have set the agenda, and luxury brands are actually turning to them and embracing them. And showing up more like them. And why is streetwear luxury and this new sort of blingy, ostentatious luxury so popular with young people? It's because they've kind of managed to digitize their product without digitizing it, because it is just loud. It is ostentatious. Like you can see these kids here. They're both wearing Off-White hoodies. You know that because it's got the iconic Off-White big double cross on the back, or it says off, right on the front. You can see one of them's holding a Supreme phone case. You can see that because it's got the iconic Supreme logo on it. One of them's even got anti-social social club socks, which he's hitched up his track pants to make sure everyone can see it. These brands are big and loud, and they're big and loud enough to stand out on news feeds. So they've digitized their product to the point where when you buy this as a young kid, certainly from this tribe and more any young person, you get the opportunity to digitize the experience and share it online. Where 20 years ago, if it was a subtle Prada suit, you'd really have to know, walking past someone in the street, what that person was wearing. To know that, you'd have to know a lot about Prada and about what their suits look like. Now, all these hoodies just simply write the big brand name on them, and that's what kids want to flex. And actually, that at the heart of this movement, you've got two sort of concepts or ideas, or in some respect, just hashtags. And one is the flex, which is just this new sort of way of just sort of showing off. It's just the new word for kids. It's what we would have probably called 15 years ago bling. They now say flex, but it's the exact same idea. It's showing off your valuables in a non-humble way. And then you've got this other idea, which is quite humorous, which is simply called the drip. And it's all about, it's probably based on some idea of like dripping in gold or dripping in luxury, but it's how you describe your outfit. And social media has allowed, the flex and the drip just to be amplified, because it's no longer who just walks past you in the street. It's how you can show that online. And, if you just look at drip as a sort of a hashtag, the multiple ones, drip life, drip club, drip, or whatever it is, you'll see that most of the images just all of the same style. The young kids just showing off their swag. The young kids showing off their new trainers, their jackets, their hoodies, whatever. And they've got Drip's got over 3 million posts. Drip Club's 2.5 million. If you just go and look at streetwear, it's got 25 million. So there's these tribes and cultural connections globally. And by the way, we've been looking at this movement for a while now with a lot of the brands we work with, and certainly luxury brands in the alcohol, in the cosmetics and fragrance categories and so on. And this is kind of an eye-opener for many of them. That it's the thing about these cultures is that they because they exist so much online and they're just so connected around the world. The kids in London have just from this tribe have more in common with kids in New York from this tribe, because they're so connected, than someone outside it down the street from where they live. And it's often quite a surprise to our clients when they go and they go, shit, I've never seen this or never heard of it, and I can't believe the scale, because it's all happening online. So knowing that we've got a consumer that's gravitating towards big brands, especially luxury brands, because it's the one thing that still holds cultural value in the world, what effect is the street culture tribe having on luxury? Well, this is how luxury kind of used to work. It was all about exclusivity. And I think, Patek Philippe is probably the archetype, or certainly one of the best portrayers of this kind of idea. Everything about this brand has always been about absolute exclusivity. It's got an exclusive price point for a start. It's got an exclusive brand appeal. And you even look at this advertising campaign that's been running for so many years that, it's one of the things you learn about when you go to ad school, this classic line of, you never actually own a Patek Philippe. You merely look after it for the next generation. It's kind of, I don't know, it's one of those messages you go, God, I can't believe they can still say something like that. And you look at it and it's always like rich white guy with obnoxiously rich white son. But that whole message by this brand is just ultimately just ridiculously exclusive. It basically says if your dad didn't own one of these, then you can't. It's designed by its nature to be exclusive. They're exclusive in their supply. I found out that this watch brand only makes 60,000 watches a year, and they're pretty much always just made that amount. They're exclusively crafted, but most importantly, they have spent a huge amount of money and effort telling the entire world that only some people can ever really wear one of these watches. So it's a shared idea about this brand, that exclusivity. And you've seen that in other categories. You've seen that's one of the reasons why Porsche spends so much advertising to the masses, knowing that there's only a handful of people in the world that will ever actually want to and can afford driving a Porsche, because the importance of driving something that luxurious is the fact that other people know what it means in the world. And that's how old luxury used to work. And look, I'm not going to sit here and say that that still doesn't work, because you still get the real sort of dominant sort of influences from this cultural tribe still loving that super exclusivity. Drake is always going on about his favorite watches being this brand. I would hazard to guess he's paid to say that, but nevertheless. And in 2018, I found this article from 2018 that it was the 25 best rap lyrics about this watch brand so far, they were saying. So it's still got credence. But what's happening more importantly for today's discussion is that it's losing its appeal with this younger generation, and it's losing. It's not the only playbook that a luxury brand can play to, because now the lines between luxury and street are completely and ultimately blurred. Like this article from Quartzy basically said it did say nobody knows what luxury is anymore. And I think the image that they use is really telling, even if it's from 2017. Where you've got a Balenciaga, a 101-year-old brand, luxury brand, traditional luxury brand Balenciaga, selling, making a denim jacket. Like denim jacket is basically working class wear, right? It was first designed for miners and so on. And this is not a cheap jacket. A denim jacket might cost you normally 50 or 80 quid. Well, this one costs you 800 because Balenciaga's written their name on their back. And the handbag that she's wearing is, a luxury handbag, but it's got this really utilitarian style of sort of urban, strap on it that just says off-white, off-white, off-white. And Highstop found that 81% of modern luxury consumers believe that the definition of luxury is just rapidly changing. It's no longer just playing to that one aesthetic and one cue. So what's happening is luxury is being democratized. And, if you sat here 10 years ago and said luxury will be democratized, I'm sure every luxury brand in the world would say it'll never happen because it will devalue luxury. I'm going to show you how it hasn't devalued luxury with some data points around like brands that have actually done this and absolutely smashed it. And I'm not talking about just like doing it to be cool, but doing it to drive massive brand growth. But it's been completely democratized. And Virgil Abloh, the founder of Off-White and the head of menswear for Louis Vuitton, basically says luxury these days is completely democratized. It's anything you covet. For a young kid, it could be as simple as their first Supreme t-shirt. And that's something that kid is going to remember and value for the rest of their lives. That's what luxury is these days. It's just become more accessible. And it's meant that luxury brands have completely changed the way that they interact in the world. So it's not about, the old, luxury shops, and the famous, what's the famous New York street? Fifth Avenue, is it? All the big luxury brands that used to, or still have shops there, they used to basically like have pretty scary looking security people out the front, kind of openly discouraging young kids from going into the store because they thought they were time wasters, and just letting in the 55-year-old, rich people into their store. Now they welcome them in with open arms, and now brands like Louis Vuitton can operate in a world where they're quite happy to make a retro computer game that is just purely designed to make the brand more accessible, more fun, and all aimed at the youth. It means that luxury is flexing the rules of the behavior and just turning up in places where you'd never expect it. So here's Virgil Abloh again, and him and his Off-White brand have done collaborations with IKEA to make, to bring the luxury idea into a brand as like IKEA, which is all about accessibility. They completely changed the rules. Like this, you would have never thought this was going to happen 10 years ago, but this is how these brands are operating in the world. And beyond just being accessible, they're just becoming youthful and rebellious. So, you've got a luxury cognac brand, doing some of their marketing and advertising with a convicted felon, A$AP Rocky, and track pants and sitting on the floor. That should never really happen. You've got Ciroc doing things with skate brand Palace, and Rolex, probably one of the archetypes of the whole idea of luxury consumption. They've done a collaboration with Supreme, and what they allowed Supreme to do, I don't know if you can see it on the screen, so I'll just tell you what it is. On that face of that classic Rolex watch, they've just written the words "fuck 'em." So if Rolex can go out and put a limited edition drop with skate brand Supreme and just write the words "fuck 'em" on a watch, I think the rules have changed. I think the rules of luxury have completely changed, and it's no longer all about being exclusivity. It's about being rebellious, accessible, and just breaking rules along the way. Now the question is it a good idea? Is this worthwhile for a brand to do? Is it just chasing cool, or is it actually financially rewarding? Does it grow brands? I mean, at the end of the day, that's what we're here to do. Well, look, turns out it does in a big way. So here's what the brand Gucci's revenue has looked like over the last, up to 2019, up to 2013 to 2019. It was pretty much flat heading into 2015. And then Alessandro Michele took over the new creative director, someone who actually grew up in the sort of skateboarding, tribe. And what they have done is they have managed to, through his creative guidance, through their brand building, their marketing, their comms and content and so on, they have, and even the products they produce, they have managed to appeal to a younger generation probably more successfully than any of the big fashion brands. So in 2017, 55% of their sales were to consumers younger than 35. That was a sort of initial impact. By 2018, it was 62%. And then one High Snob report that's come out just recently basically said that in the last 2 years, they have lowered their average consumer age by a decade. And look at the right. That's the effect on it. That's the effect. You've gone from a 4 billion euro company brand to double in size in 4 years. I mean, that's phenomenal growth, and it's all because they've just managed to lower the age of their consumers and make their brand accessible, interesting to the youth. Now, imagine going back to 2014 and trying to argue to Gucci, you need to get 20-year-olds who are into skateboarding and rap music into your brand. You can imagine the horrors. But if you said, I guarantee it'll double the size of your brand, then you probably would have listened a bit more. And it's not just them. So Rolls-Royce has done, over the last 10 years, they've had a really concentrated effort to lower the average age of their buyer. And they've done it by 13 years over the last 10 years. And actually the average buyer of a Rolls-Royce right now is a 43-year-old, meaning that there's for every 60-year-old that buys a Rolls-Royce, there's also a 20-year-old, which I find amazing that there's enough kids in the world that can afford that. And they've done that off the back of celebrity endorsements, sports stars, and gamers, like you can see here with this image from China. They've done that by just going after the youth influence market. Now, what's that meant is that actually the average age of a Rolls-Royce buyer is now 10 years younger than the average age of a new car buyer. Can you imagine that? Probably the most expensive car brand in the world has got an average age. Their consumer is 10 years younger than the average age of the entire category. And did it work? Well, in 2019, pre-COVID, their 2020 figures aren't out now. They had their best year ever when it came to Rolls-Royce sales and revenue. And the CEO credits it to this concerted effort they've had over the last 10 years just to drive the age down and rebrand the car, not as something that an old retired, usually man would buy to celebrate a life's work. They buy it now to flex their success that they're earning already at a very younger age. Hennessy, the cognac brand, has always aligned itself to youth and rap music. They've doubled in size in the last 10 years at the same sort of when this tribe has been growing more and more in its influence. And, at the same time that rap music has become the most downloaded and sold genre in the world. Now that, and you can see their revenue on the right. They've gone from 2010 or 4.2 9-liter cases, which is how you measure, for those people in the booze industry, it's how you measure brand volume. So 9-liter case is about 12 bottles of a box of 12 bottles. They've gone from 4 million to 8 million. They've just under doubled. Now that is far and away over the entire category. So the category hasn't grown anywhere near that speed. It has grown, but it's grown basically because Hennessy itself has grown. And then the final thing is like that 20, 25-year-old skate, luxury brand. Yeah, call it what you will. It's a streetwear brand. born in skateboarding, but it's super expensive, and it collaborates with Louis Vuitton and ACP and all these other brands. While for it just sold itself for $2.1 billion. Not bad for 20 years work. So it's not just about chasing the cool. It's not just about like trying to attach yourself to the youth because it feels right. It turns out that this is how brands in this category are growing exponentially over and above their competitors far over and above, and actually growing their brands off the back of it. So if we know that, well, how are these brands operating in the world? How are they? What tactics and strategies are they putting in place to make sure that they drive this big growth, and by attaching themselves to this new tribe, by engaging the younger consumer? And as I said before, I think these learnings are important, not just if you're in the luxury category. I think they're important if you're in most categories, because this is where future growth is going to come from. And I talk to a lot of clients, and especially we do a lot of work in the booze and fashion industries and so on. And a lot of the booze brands sort of say, we really made a mistake. We didn't see the influence of the hipster coming through when brands like Hendrix and what are they called, Aperol and so on did. Now, my advice is to make sure you're getting ahead of the curve and not turning up late to the party. So here's what we can learn about how these brands are doing it, because I think if you're out there in this category, you need to be thinking about doing it today, if not 12 months ago. So as I said, they make themselves accessible, but let's dive into this a little bit more. And how are they actually making themselves accessible? How are they doing it through brand, through marketing, through comms? But also I'll show you how they're doing it through product, which is really interesting. So as I said earlier, look, luxury used to be about one sort of idea and one aesthetic. It was about snobbery. It was about kind of this over romanticized idea of wealth and success. It was basically famous people in Tag Heuer watches, or and honestly, it all looked the same too. It was always kind of dark black, often set in Paris, and had a celebrity and not much else going on. And those were the old rules of, they were all about exclusivity. They were all about trying to sell off the back of the idea that, you're in a club. You're in a club if you can buy these and want to buy these things, and it's an exclusive club. As I said earlier, it's now becoming accessible. But how are they actually doing it? So this is Alessandro Michele from Gucci, who's one of the archetypes of this idea. He says that exclusivity could be about a product, and I'll show you how some brands are doing that in a second. But more important, exclusivity of brand is something very different. Today, what is going to win is inclusivity of the brand in all aspects. That's your shops, that's your advertising, your communication, the people, the influencers you use, especially. That's what they do. They want to make their brands inclusive, to make sure that they because this is an inclusive demographic, and it is an inclusive tribe. But the important thing to note, I believe, is that it's not all about that. It's not all about looking really super youthful and gritty and grungy and, all about sort of, the street culture tribe. What these brands do really successful, and almost all of the successful brands do this, is they simultaneously do both. Now, it's kind of like, this would be something that would really upset the purists like Byron Sharp, but this is what they're doing. They're basically going out there with so much content and so much information. They do both of these things at the exact same time. So you can still find brands like Louis Vuitton and Gucci and so on, and Rolex and all those other sort of brands advertising in the classic exclusive way, the really expensive ad with really expensive models, really expensively styled, beautifully shot, celebrities sometimes showing off their product and just branding it with their brand. Now they still do that, and they still do that to good effect. But the new thing that they're doing at the exact same time, they haven't done just all switched in. They've got these kind of simultaneous tracks running. Is that they mix it with inclusive kind of more grungy sort of products and comms. And you can see on the right here the same brands, Gucci and so on. They've got content with Harry Styles walking down like a working class street in the UK. They've got t-shirt ranges that kind of look like old band labels. They align themselves with rappers, dangerous rappers like Lil Pump with Gucci Gang and so on. In fact, their spring summer range this year was launched online, all through this kind of retro computer graphics sort of glitchy style, unpolished look and aesthetic. And there's a little video here of of what they call Gucci Sneaker Garage, and it's completely designed for the youth. I mean, it's garish, it's brightly colored. It looks like a retro computer game, and it's a way that you can customize your own Gucci trainers. So the key thing here is that they're not going all to the right and they're not staying all on the left. They're doing both things simultaneously. And it's not just the fashion brands. You know, Hennessy's been really good at this over the last 10, 15 years of doing the two simultaneously. So in the same week, they can launch a super expensive, you know, series of short films with Ridley Scott. That's all about the odyssey of the taste of one of their really expensive XO products, which is, you know, for cognac knowers, they'll know that you know, it's all, there's different letters that all mean different things effectively. XO means, does it mean extremely old? I should have known that fact before I started that sentence. But anyway, it's one of the more expensive cognacs. And so they can go and launch this beautifully polished and ad campaign and piece of content with someone as big as Ridley Scott. And it just looks like a classical luxury advertising ad where it's all about deep colors and darkness, and like it you know, it looks like it's got the budget of a blockbuster film. And in the same week, they can release a video with 6ix9ine's Gotti song earlier this year before he was imprisoned, where one of their products will turn up 12 times in the first minute. So it kind of seems like this kind of feels like you're breaking the rules of marketing, right? You've always got to be doing the same thing. You've always got to be the same brand so people can build memory sort of connections with your brand. Turns out these luxury brands don't. They can be dangerous on one side, they can be rebellious on one side at the exact same time of still being exclusive. And I think that mix is super important. Don't know if you've seen this piece of content, but you know, there he is holding a Hennessy bottle, and it's just like classic ostentatious hip hop, you know, girls in bikinis and the rest of it. You know, it's quite weird. It feels wildly dated, but apparently kids still want to, you know, want those type of music videos. But it's not just their marketing. So, or it also turns up their product. So when Hennessy does something or does big ad campaigns, you'll find it's usually for their really expensive upper range, whether it's the Paradis or the XO, like I mentioned before. And those bottles sell for $2,000 US, or you know, £2,000, and go up to £4,000. They start at about £200, I think. So it's expensive cognac, and that's what appears in their comms usually. But if you stand outside an off-license in Dalston, you'll see that kids buying Hennessy are obviously not walking out of the off-license with that. They're buying into the brand at a much more accessible price point. They're buying in at, you know, $9.95 or 10 quid a bottle. Now, and it's that smaller size. But it's still a taste of the luxury. It's still, you know, it's still that sort of access to that luxury lifestyle. Now, the important thing here is that. This, you know, the VS, the Hennessy VS in this shape or the next shape, it is not a cheap cognac. I mean, it's not the world's most expensive, but it's not like you could buy a bottle of, I don't know, Jim Beam for cheaper, right? Or a bottle of just like Smirnoff vodka cheaper at that same size. So it's cheap, but it's expensive. And what I mean by that is it's cheap for Hennessy, because it's only $9.95, but it's expensive for the category. It might only be £1 more expensive, but it just holds that slight level of elevation at that price point, and they can demand it. And actually, that's what young kids are buying into. They're buying into that at that accessible level, because there's just not enough kids in the world to, you know, that have got enough money to smash $2,000 on a bottle of cognac. And you see it back to the fashion brands, you can see it there as well. They are lowering through sort of merchandising their brand, and they are allowing you to access it. Now, whether it's Off-White making a face mask, which, by the way, they kind of got pandered for because it's, you know, in the middle of a pandemic, you know, they don't always get it right. In the middle of a pandemic, they're trying to charge people 60 or 80 bucks for a face mask to be branded. You know, that didn't go down so well. But they do it with phone cases, and actually a Cold Wall, which is another, you know, super expensive sort of streetwear luxury brand. What they've done recently is they've kind of made this DIY apparel. So you don't buy a belt, you buy a belt buckle, and you grab your old belt, take off the buckle, and you put a new one on. So they're actually allowing, you don't even have to buy a full piece of kit from these guys. You just buy a little bit. Now it's an expensive belt buckle, but it's cheap for a Cold War. Sakai, the fashion brand again, and every one of these brands does phone cases, right? Now you can get a cheaper phone case in the world from Amazon. £2 you can get a phone case. So they're not selling them for £2, but they're selling them at a price point that allows consumers to access their brand at a much more affordable level. And that's what I would suggest to brands out there today. You've got to do this with your marketing. You've got to be more accessible, but you've got to allow people to buy into the flex and the luxury of your brand at a much more easier way to consume, rather than just those really high price points, because that's where you're going to get consumers not just to want the brand, but to buy into it. And remember, these consumers, this tribe is kind of, they're not traditional. They don't have 2 kids and a mortgage. They're kind of cash rich but asset poor, and so these types of things is how they spend their money. So the second thing to know about is what we call Bling 2.0. And the point here is that Bling 2.0 has gone beyond just the price tag. So here's a couple of sound bites and stats. So McKinsey looked into the new Chinese luxury consumer, the younger consumers over there, and they basically said, look, young Chinese consumers view ownership and affiliation with designer brands as a form of social capital. And High Snob, in their one of their big reports, said 85% of people believe that what their clothes represent is just as important as their quality or design. What are they talking about when they say that? What does that really mean? It's effectively this. It's that old status and old ways to create your identity. Bling 1.0 effectively was all about look at me, I can afford it. So when you 15 years ago, 10 years ago, if you bought a bottle of Cristal because you heard a rapper singing about it or rapping about it in one of their songs, what you were saying to the world is, look at me, I can afford it. I didn't need to know about the brand. I didn't really need to know, where the champagne came from or anything like that. But what these new brands do is they attach cultural currency to it. So it's no longer just an off-white phone case or a Louis Vuitton phone case or whatever. It doesn't say just look at me, I can afford it, because actually it's a much more accessible phone product price point, I should say. What it says is look at me, I know about Virgil Abloh, the designer behind this. I know of his cultural importance. And that's what Bling 2.0 really looks like. It's not so much about me saying, look, I can afford it. It's about, look at me, I'm connected with this culture. I understand the cultural importance of it. I'm basically, to use a crass word, I'm cool. And actually, I think I won't read all this, but 2/3 of High Snob readers believe that the product someone wears conveys whether that person is culturally knowledgeable, not whether that person can afford it, not whether that's impressive that they can afford it, but whether they are actually culturally knowledgeable, i.e., are they connected to culture, are they cool, or are they not? Now, how do they create cultural value? Well, they just go and do things in the world that are interesting to young people. They don't create content. They create news and attention. And, if you've heard me talk before, I talk about this a bit, but I think when you set out to create content, what you normally end up doing is you start to go and look back in your history books and you try and create something about the craft or how your brand started, or who's distilling your whiskey, or how the fabrics are purchased and bought and so on. That's what content looks like. These kids don't give a shit whether your brand is 100 years old or 2 years old. They're just attracted to anything that's new and exciting, because that's what's cultural currency. So that allows Burberry to turn up in the big gaming platform Twitch. That allows Gucci to get on board with Fnatic, the gaming crew, because kids notice it and they go, that's cool, that's interesting, I've got something to tell my friends. It's IKEA and Virgil Abloh are Off-White. It's Supreme flying a massive Supreme flag across New York illegally. That's what captures the attention. They create news, and therefore they create cultural value. So when these young people are buying into these brands, what they're doing is they're buying into the brand that's rebellious enough to break rules. They're buying into the brand that they is interesting enough to turn up on Twitch and not be exclusive to them anymore. So what I'd urge people to do is think, it's how can our brand create news and attention, therefore to drive cultural importance, therefore to drive sales, because that's what kids want to buy into when it comes. And that's for us the new definition of bling. That's bling 2.0. The third thing is that they've found their voice. And I would argue that these luxury brands actually they've found their voice when it comes to social issues more frequently and more courageously than any other category. And I'll go through some examples here to show you what I mean. But just when I'm going through this, think about it. Have you ever seen Tesco? Have you ever seen a car insurance brand? Have you ever seen an airline make these kind of stands so publicly? So luxury has got aware. So a couple of examples, whether it's Burberry and Marcus Rashford getting together to support his cause with school lunches and so on, or whether it's Noah, the clothing label from the US, started by the same guy that started Supreme. That brand there is a skate sort of streetwear brand, a little bit more upmarket than Supreme, and it talks about the expensive sunglasses and hoodies and t-shirts and whatever you can buy for them online. That's mainly what they do. But about every fourth, fifth, sixth post is actually about awareness. It's about social awareness. So this is a screen grab from when they were when the elections were on in the US, and they did a lot of posts just about voting education, how to enroll, how to vote, and all those types of things. So they've become very aware, and actually 65% of young people have been influenced by their friends to buy brands that speak to their shared values. And if we look earlier in the year, when obviously the George Floyd death happened, and the very important Black Lives Matter was really massive in the US and around the world. That issue was really coming to the fore. These brands were the most vocal that I can find of any category. They didn't hide behind their stiff upper lip. They weren't scared of what it meant. They were brave enough to go out there and make a stand. So, whether it was Supreme openly pledging 500K to social justice charities, whether it was Hennessy stopped posting basically for a couple of weeks about cognac, and all they did was talk and post about the importance of the BLM movement. And also, by the way, wrote a check to support charities as well. And I really like this just small but telling example over here on the right from Marc Jacobs, where Marc Jacobs, this is in their LA store. I can't remember the name of the street, the boulevard in LA with all the luxury stores, but Marc Jacobs is one of them there. And when the movement was at its crescendo, there was obviously protests down, some of these well-to-do areas in LA. Now, what some of the protesters had done had gone along all these signs where, classic, many brands are obviously named after a person, and they scratched out the name Marc Jacobs, and they wrote more important names like Sandra Bland and George Floyd on these signs. Now, 15 years ago, I reckon what would have happened is that store manager would have rushed outside with some hot soapy water and made sure that Marc Jacobs was reinstalled in the sign. But these days, what they did is they took a photo of it. The brand took a photo of it and basically said, today or this week or this year or forever maybe, these names are more important than ours. Now, I have, as I said earlier, have you ever seen something like that from a Tesco, from a biscuit brand or anything? These guys are the ones that are going out there and doing it and talking about it, and they're reaping the rewards for it. I would say, and I'll mention this earlier a bit later, but I would say that these brands here are actually not brave. I think it's fucking brave not to have a voice in these issues anymore. I think that's incredibly brave, because these brands that don't have a voice about this or have an opinion on it are going to be on the wrong side of history. And whilst they might want to protect the current consumer base, they're not thinking about the next generation of consumers that should be buying them. Nevertheless, look, here's the key point and how I think this has changed, however, about this social cause. And, I think 10 years ago, when Simon Sinek came out with his, everyone needs a why and got a right number on the whole marketing category, it kind of made some sense for a lot of brands, to find a social cause. And I don't know if you remember the Tom's shoe brand, it was a millennial darling, wasn't it, 10 years ago? Everyone was walking around Tom's.
And at the heart of their brand, they had the social cause message. They basically said, every time you buy a pair of Toms, we'll give one to a child in need. Look, that's a great thing to do. I'm not here to say that, obviously. That's an amazing thing to do, and well done, Toms, for making that stand and putting social right at the heart of their brand. But I think this has changed a little bit, and I think why, possibly Toms is struggling is you can't have cause without style. No one's gonna buy something they don't really want just for the cause, and this is what anymore anyway. And this is what's changed, I believe, is that now social cause, social awareness is hygiene. It can no longer be the center of your brand if you want to attract this generation. The center of your brand has to be cultural, collateral, cultural cool, basically. So it can no longer. This is just what young kids expect from a brand. Now it took me a little while to find, but it is on their website. Apple is carbon neutral, and they've made an open pledge to be by 2030, all their products will be too. Now, I didn't know that about Apple. I would have assumed, if you asked me, that Apple would be a massive polluter. All their servers, all their, the size of their business, how they make it, with all the different metals and so on. I would have thought that, they would hide that fact. But what they don't hide it. They talk about it, but they talk about it in a way that's hygiene because they have to. Apple is not a green brand, and when you come to brand building or to how the brand exists, it's not why people buy it, but it's hygiene for them to do it. Same thing when it comes to Gucci. Like, Gucci has made a big commitment to their Gucci Equilibrium program, which is their commitment to positive change for people on the planet. It's not the center of their brand, it's hygiene. It's just what they're doing also. And the same with Louis Vuitton, who basically said they're going to use responsibly sourced raw materials by 2025 and zero single-use plastic by 2030. It's not the heart of their brand. It's not why people buy them, but it's why. But it allows them to stay, culturally aware. Unlike Tom's, which it was the center of their entire brand. But interestingly, here's a small example. When they go do something, these fashion brands, these luxury fashion brands, they still manage to find a way to do it with hype and to do it with interest. So here's a couple of examples of t-shirts that were exclusive t-shirts that were made in Japan and in the US, where it was basically, you can see the message on the front there, Japanese solidarity with BLM. On the back was just a bunch of different logos from all the really important, interesting, youthful brands like Sakai and so on. Now, what they managed to do with that is they all the proceeds from these two shirts, and they did the same in the US with Fear of God and Union and Noah and so on. What they did with that is they did two things. They every proceed from all this revenue from the sale of these T-shirts went straight to the cause. So it cost them something. But that also created hype. It also created something interesting that kids wanted. And I think that's now the balance you've got to strike as a luxury brand. Yes, you should be doing things because we should be good people in marketing and in production. We should be making sure we're aware of social issues that are important and climate issues that are important. But it's just what we should be doing, and that's what it's expected by kids. So having a voice isn't brave, it's hygiene. And I would expect over the next 3, 4, 5 years that actually what would be really brave is not having a voice, because you'll stick out like a sore thumb for being so socially unaware. The next thing is, and the last thing I'll talk about today before I just sort of sum up, is the speed at which these brands operate with. They no longer work to a seasonal model of a 6-week ad campaign in the summer and a follow-up in Christmas. It just doesn't work anymore. These are always on brands. And I would say this is, for me, how all brands, luxury or not, need to be thinking these days about how they're going to connect with the youth. And to be honest, with all consumers, not just the youth. Look, this is the world our consumers live in. This is what happens every minute on the internet. 19 million texts sent, 1.6 million Tinder swipes, would you believe? Not always left, not always right. 700,000 Instagram images scrolled. This is what happens every single minute of the internet. This young generation has only ever known this world. And then they're very, very good at navigating this. They can see any of that with a click of a button or a touch of a thumb. So consumers have never lived in a world, all of us have never lived in a world where there is more things to see and do. So I think the most valuable commodity for a brand these days is absolute attention. is doing things that cut through this, doing things that grab your attention, because we see so much content is just forgettable. Very few brands can do that or have done that, but this is what every brand should want. And it means we've got to rethink how we approach a plan when it comes to brand building. As I said earlier, there is no point spending your entire year in PowerPoint to do one big campaign in the summer and go, well, that's a job well done, we'll see you next summer, or whenever it may be. Because if you're live on TV and you got all your billboards and you got some content and you're live and you make a big splash for 6 weeks, guess what? You've just basically allowed every other brand and every other competitor of yours inside and outside your category beat you for the other 45 or 44 months of the year. They have the ones that are grabbing the attention. And I just don't think you can survive anymore on seasonal advertising campaigns. It's just not how the world works. And this is because this is a generation brought up on drop culture. They are brought up on brands like Supreme, dropping new, exciting, attention-grabbing stuff every Thursday. If you run your 4-week TV commercial, guess what? Next Thursday, you could well be forgotten because Supreme just did something more interesting. And look, here's an article from Hypebeast, the online sort of magazine that's all about this culture and luxury, fashion and art and so on. Every week they drop an article that says these are the 8 most important drops you need to see this week. 8. They're not all of them, but 8 are happening every single week that's grabbing these kids' attention. There's no way they're going to remember your TV ad from last March. And this is what it looks like in practice. I think Ciroc have got this down. I think Ciroc have managed to do this really well, where they basically, they've got an always-on model of creating attention, whether it's like, and basically what they're doing is limited release. So 5 collaborations in 7 months throughout Europe, one with Machina, one with Pantone, Findac, Vivienne Westwood, whoever. And they're doing that and they just did one this week, by the way, with Palace Skateboards, their second one with Palace Skateboards. They do it and they're always on and they're always grabbing that attention. They're always out there just staying top of mind, and they'd rather do that than spend money on TV. Not, by the way, not that I think spending money on TV is a bad idea by any stretch, but not all of us can afford to be on TV every single week. So it's about thinking about what's the most important thing to be doing. Hennessy, again, I won't dwell on this, but Hennessy have got a long history of always making collaborations with labels and so on, so they stay top of the cultural agenda. They don't just do that with that Ridley Scott film and call it a day. And this is not a luxury game. This is a Gen Z game. What you're seeing here is brands like KFC and the fast food and many brands, Nike, of course, just employ this tactic to ensure they stay top of attention. So while KFC still does a lot of advertising about just how much their chicken costs, they also go online, they put digital first, and they create news and attention by doing things that are just kind of weird, crazy, and surprising. Whether it's a gravy smelling candle, whether it's sunscreen that'll make you smell like crispy chicken, whether it's a collaboration, a ridiculous collaboration with Crocs shoes, they just go and do it. You can almost set your watch by it. It happens once a month with KFC. They go and do something interesting that grabs attention. And I think what you do when you do that is you prioritize. When you prioritize attention in an always-on manner, you actually de-risk your marketing. And my last example for today is with Burger King. So when Burger King did this really famous award-winning campaign of the moldy burger, you might sit there and go, like, if you produce a food or, if you produce clothes and you want to show them perishing or whatever, if that was the one thing you did all year, that would be so risky, because do you really want to leave the only memory you've created this year of your brand with a moldy burger? But they de-risk that particular attention-grabbing stunt because it's not the only thing they do. What they are, and it's not the only thing they're famous for. They're famous for trolling McDonald's, whether it's like, burger, changing their menu to troll McDonald's for a day in the US, where it's like, anything but a Big Mac was how you ordered it. That's how you had to ask for a burger. Whether it's like their Halloween campaign that if you dress up and come as a clown, you can eat like a king in Burger King, trolling Ronald McDonald's. Whether it's giving away a 1 cent Burger King Whopper sandwich through their new app as long as you ordered it from within a McDonald's store. Or whether it's their famous, sort of like trolling, McDonald's to create a joint burger cafe, or I don't know if you guys saw this, but every ad they shot, I think last year, they showed you at the end of the year that actually, because their Whopper is bigger than a Big Mac, they put a Big Mac behind in the photo, and you didn't know that to the end of the year. So they de-risk every single individual one of these activations by just staying always on. So how are these luxury brands winning the next generation? Final slide for me. Like, they are attaching themselves to a dominant consumer tribe that is setting the cultural agenda. It doesn't matter if you attach yourself to Street Culture Tribe or one of the other tribes that are going to be influential over the next 10 years. We are advocating that is the way to go after the youth. It's not about finding your volume from that tribe. The tribe, in fact, could be small, but they're culturally important enough to ensure that the rest of us watch what they do, follow them, and kind of are influenced by them. They've made their brands seductively accessible. They play the highs and the lows. They still do the glamorous advertising, but they also are gritty. They're also sort of rebellious, and they're an expensive Rolex ad, but they're also a limited edition Rolex watch with the words "fuck 'em" written on it. They create news, not content. They don't care about their history. They live for today, and they give their brands cultural bling. That idea of bling 2.0, not just price tag bling. They've found their voice, but they realize it's hygiene. It's not. You shouldn't be too proud to be socially aware. It just needs to be something you do. And they're moving impatiently to an always-on model of grabbing attention over traditional seasonal campaigns. For me, that's the most important. You've got to be grabbing attention as often as possible. Otherwise, you just get forgotten in this world. Look, if you want to agree or disagree, I enjoy both. You can snap this QR code, which is something we've all been learning about in the days of COVID. Just snap it with your phone, and you can find me on LinkedIn, or if you're old school, you can email me, and we can debate it further. I hope it was interesting, and there's something to be learned for today.
Great. Well, we've got a couple of questions that have come through, so I'll put those to you now before we wrap up, because we've gone past the 11 o'clock. So one of the questions came in. It was from someone, an anonymous person, who said, with this being relevant globally, is there a particular global market where this change is happening quicker or more influential? Any differences by market? So
the markets we've been looking into is the ones you'd see. So I'll tell you where we've found that it's less current, and I'll tell you the ones where it's happening. It's happening in all the important ones. I don't know which category you're asking from, but big in China, big in the US, big in Europe. And in fact, I was just looking into it in the Russian market, big in Russia as well at the moment. Where we're seeing less evidence, big in Africa too. Where we're seeing less of it is possibly places like South America. I do not believe it's not going to come. It's a culturally connected audience, and you can see seedlings of it. But I do think we've looked in Brazil, Argentina, and so on, and it seems like it's probably 4 years earlier. But if you're looking for volume and you want to play in the big markets, China, US, Europe, it's all there.
Cool. Just got another couple of questions. So, is there any evidence of losing existing customers by launching these new street campaigns?
I don't have a good answer for you on that. I'm not sure. But what I'd say is every time we look into it and we look at the success of these brands, look, I can't tell you whether they've lost some to gain others, but I can tell you they're gaining them. And at the end of the day, it shouldn't really matter who we're gaining, just are we gaining them? And are we gaining them quicker than we're losing them? But it seems to me, no. To be honest, it seems to me, anecdotally, they're not, because they still hold. If you walk into a luxury store, it still feels like luxury. It's not exclusive to that existing consumer. It's just a much more accessible. And the key thing with digital is, I don't expect or no one would expect a 60-year-old lifetime Gucci wearer to ever see what they're doing online. In all honesty, they don't need to. They're buying into the brand already. So I would hazard as a guess that. No, it doesn't put that consumer at risk. The truth is, if you buy a brand and you've been buying it for a while, the marketing starts to have less effect on you. because you start buying the product and you start like, appreciating it for its product. And actually it's you build a product relationship more than a brand relationship once you've been buying. If you're on your fifth Mercedes-Benz, the advertising doesn't matter much because you must like Mercedes-Benz.
Well, another question here. Thanks a lot, fascinating presentation, and I've seen a lot. My question would be: is it true for Gen Z more than millennials? So how do you reconcile Gen Z and millennials, not even mentioning the other consumers, when aspirations might differ a little bit?
Look, I think what's important is it goes back to that point where who's influencing who, and it just turns out throughout humanity, the youth has usually influenced everyone else. And so, yeah, look, millennials are buying into luxury. There's absolutely no doubt about it. But the new sort of tribe that's coming through that's setting the cultural agenda is influencing millennials, and it's influencing people older than that. These people that were once hipsters are now more than happy to wear like big, loud trainers. So look, the millennial has got the big spending power. That will last for a while. But I guess my argument today is, and it will depend category by category, but my argument today is that there is no point going after targeting everything at a millennial, because they're just getting old and they're losing their kind of cool. And actually millennials are more and more, finding what they find interesting from this new youth coming through. I can see someone just pop up with, do generations matter anymore? Probably less and less. It's much more about attitudes. But I don't think you can get away from the fact that a 24-year-old is probably pinnacle cool. It's just is.
There, as you see, a few more questions. I guess there's one from Stephen here. Is there a brand out there you're looking at specifically and wondering why they aren't doing this already? Is there an example of one that's ripe to be working with in this way, in your opinion?
Yeah, probably. Do I have a good example off the top of my head? I mean, I don't know why there's only one cognac brand doing it. I don't know why there's only one, Grey Goose does, but only one vodka brand.
Okay.
Oh, look, yeah, I'm sure there are. I don't have a good answer from the top of my head. I'll answer it in the reverse way. Would this work for an airline? That would be hard for me to imagine. But if it worked for Rolls-Royce, why not? Yeah. Would it work for Tesco? That would be hard for me to imagine. I mean, they're not anyway. But no. Look, I'm not saying this is the answer for every brand, but I do think if you're a luxury brand, it's what I'd be looking at the moment.
I guess that question leads on very much onto what the next question that's been asked, and one that you're working with the brands we do in this space that we often get asked a lot. So this person's asked, how do you see Gen Z? How do you see this Gen Z to evolve in the next 10 years, and what can we expect luxury to be like? Will there be a cyclical return to more subtle, contained style? I mean, that's the big question, right? It's just like if street culture has become mainstream now, are people getting tired of drops? We know that when things do hit the mainstream, the top gear, and everyone's doing the same and performing the same way, then suddenly it's the impact is weakened, and people, the new generation, the early adopters, want to make their stamp and move on. So I guess the big question is, what's next?
Yeah, well, look, to answer the first part of that question, yes, everything's cyclical. It goes from it went from yuppies to grunge, and then it went from hip hop bling to hipsters, and then now it's gone to street culture. So yeah, look, 10 years, no one's got a crystal ball, but you'd probably say that's done. But what I'd say to you is, I wouldn't use it as an excuse. I just that's a good problem to have 10 years from now if you've doubled in revenue like some of these brands have done. And you just got to keep moving fast and always keep your mind on the next cool. But look, we get asked a lot, what's next for tactics? Because, this drop culture, have you got, this idea of dropping new products every week? Is it getting fatigue? Everyone said it's got fatigue. Doesn't seem to be slowing down. But I'll take a punt. I'll look into the crystal ball and I'll tell you what could well happen here. And I'll tell you why I think this. My 7-year-old son, every weekend or every day, comes to me with his iPad and says, not that he's on his iPad every day, I should mention. although possibly is. And he comes to me and says, can you give me can you sign into the Apple account $1.99 because I want to buy Robux. Now Robux are how you buy currency in the game Roblox. Now what he's doing with that money is he's buying skins of cars, and you can do the same thing in Fortnite and so on. So look, I think what's happened now is these brands have managed to digitize their product a little bit by making it so ostentatious that you can share it online. I don't see that stopping. I see the next generation coming through and going all in on digitization, which might mean, in all honesty, that you've got to think about how you digitize your product in a much bigger way than you're doing now. So if you make a cognac now, if you make a car now, if you make, I don't know, whatever it is now, will you need to physically make every single thing that you sell? Or would you need to simply digitize it to the point where kids will be happy to show their status, to show their bling inside the next Fortnite or the next big digital world? And actually you might just find out that you can just sell a virtual bottle of cognac online, never have to make the thing. And you might find there's a big revenue there that'll be happening. So look, that's total crystal ball, that's a guess, but that would not surprise me at all, that we digitize to the point where we don't need to make every product we sell anymore. And I think that could well be what is coming next, because you can kind of see it just starting to happen now.
So we've got a couple more questions, and I'll rip through these. Regarding over 50s, do you see the value in targeting this age range because they are the ones with the most disposable income?
No, I don't. Because, well, it depends on the category. If you're marketing medical products or so on, quite possibly. But if you are trying to, look, they do have the most disposable income, there's no doubt about that. You don't have to tell them that your brand is not for them, but no one's going to buy a brand because it's cool with the 50-year-olds. I'm sorry, it's just not going to happen. Like other 50-year-olds, sure. But yeah, I get it. It's kind of that old demographic, like they've got more money, but are they willing to spend it on luxury? That stat we found is that, Gen Z is 2 times more likely to buy luxury as a treat. So look, you've got to be smart about what you do. You can't isolate the 50-year-olds and go out there and say it's not for you. But every time I look, the brands that are really winning are the ones that get to the new generation first, and they grow off the back of staying relevant. And the 50-year-old that's always bought your brand will probably continue to do it, because they're not just going to jump online and flick through Instagram, and they're not going to follow a lot of 20-year-old kids who are showing them what new cool is.
So there's a follow-up question, actually, not follow-up question, but another one which I think links to this one as well, because so another question is the massive increase in young high net worth individuals globally a major factor in this, specifically relating to things like decreasing age of Rolls-Royce owners and so on? And I know that there is a link between the boom in these high net worth individuals, but also the effect that what's happening on what young people are into, or this younger generation into, and the pest of power effect they have to their parents who are millionaires and billionaires. And we've seen from one of the brands we work with that whilst in the extreme case of that, whilst there might be like a certain amount of people that can afford the extreme levels of wealth, we're talking yachts and planes and that forth, then the tier down from that, there's a much larger amount that can just actually affect the purchasing power of this elder generation. So
I mean, there's only so many people in the world that will ever be able to afford private jets for the next 50, 100 years anyway. But yeah, of course it does. Of course, like a wealthier world and more wealthier youth, even if sometimes it's at the expense of, just different income disparity. Of course, you've got to be able to afford the stuff if you're going to buy it. But I think what's important is that they are making their once exclusive brands accessible. So they're not just growing on the back. That will be organic growth for luxury brands. More people can afford luxury, the whole luxury category will grow. And that would be the organic growth. The ones that are growing far and above organic growth, doubling in size in 5 years, are the ones that are making their brands accessible to that younger generation. So they don't have to have, £2,000 for a new jacket. They can buy the phone case for 50.
Cool. Right. Well, I think there's no more questions. So, and it's also 20 past 11, so it's probably a good time to wrap up. So thanks very much for that. And thanks to everyone that tuned in. And we'll follow up with the video and the key takeouts from this talk. So we'll be in touch soon. Thanks again.
Yeah. Hope it was enjoyable. Sorry I ran over. I have a tendency to do that. Enjoy the rest of your day.